Okay, we're page 16. And it's just 6:30. Yeah, you have the pages out? You have them? Okay.
Did you put them here?
I think there are new pages, no, Rav?
There are, but I don't think I got to them yet. No, because I think the next pages are 17 through 20. They are. So we're still on page 16. So we're working with the Rambam's principle of justice, that everything that happens to a person is justice, down to the smallest detail. And the Rambam says himself in the regular print, in the middle of 16, be not misled by the account of trials, such as some tried Abraham, meaning tested him, or afflicted you, made you hungry. Don't be bothered. Well, why is he worried? Because you might very well say, tests impose all sorts of conditions which are sometimes painful. And the test is not because you failed at something before that you're being punished for. On the contrary. The test has some forward-looking purpose. So it sounds like God is imposing suffering on a person without there having been some guilt, some failure in the past. And that would be a contradiction to his principle. So he says, don't worry about it. I'll explain to you how tests work. Well, he does in 324. He has a whole chapter on tests. But if you read the chapter, at least when I read it, he doesn't mention this problem in 324. He is in 317. And I guess he just leaves it up to you to figure out why it's not a problem. So I tried to figure it out. And that's what I'm going to give to you now. So now we're in the bold print. The Rambam notes that cases where the Creator tests people or nations seem to contradict his position. Often tests involve experience of pain. That pain is not deserved by the previous actions of the one who is tested. How then is it not a contradiction to the principle that every pain is due to prior sin? He answers at a later chapter. He'll explain the true nature of trials. The problem is to see how that discussion answers this question about violating justice. So here's what happens in 324. The Rambam discusses the subject of trials or tests. He sees in this subject two severe problems. That's why he wrote a chapter about it, because the very idea that Torah says in several cases that God tested us raises two severe problems. One is that some interpret the trials, not what it says in the Torah, the way it's interpreted. Some interpret the trials as imposing suffering on people of this world so as to increase their reward in the world to come, and he has already rejected that with two hands, and he said that is a contradiction to justice. So, trials have to be explained in such a way to show that their interpretation is wrong, and he will do that. And he says, this contradicts the principle of justice. There are no verses in the Torah that express this explicitly. You look at the verses that describe trials, none of them say, I'm giving you this test so as to cause you pain, so that you'll have more reward in the world to come. Never is that written in any verse. So we're only dealing with an interpretation of the trials, not the trials themselves. And even though there's a Talmudic source which is interpreted by some to say that suffering in this world causes greater pleasure in the world to come, which we saw a few pages ago, we saw above that he rejects this idea. So that's the first problem in trials, and he's going to solve the problem by telling you the true purpose of trials. The second great problem he sees in the type of trials, it seems to be an implication the Creator does not know what a person will do until he tests him. It sounds like I'm testing him to see what he will do, so as to know how faithful he is to me, or how clearly he can be courageous and consistent in fulfilling the mitzvahs and so on and so on. And that makes it sound like the purpose of the test is to reveal the information of which the Creator was ignorant, and of course that's impossible to accept. The Rambam's solution to both problems is to explain all passages describing tests as having one or another of two purposes. So this is the true understanding of what a test is. It has one or the other, maybe both, of two purposes. One purpose is to just demonstrate what people are to believe, and the other is to demonstrate what people are to do. Through the performance of those who are tested, we, the readers, learn this is what God expects of us. Sometimes what he expects us to believe, and sometimes what he expects us to do. It is not at all to discover what he didn't know about them, that they would do it or not. Now, if this sounds artificial to you, let me give you a parable. Right? I make clay vessels. I'm at the shuk, I'm selling them. Somebody says to me, are your vessels strong? My vessels are like iron. Yeah, I know, because you're selling them and you want a high price. Prove it. Watch. I pick up the clay vessel, I take a hammer, bang! The hammer bounces off the vessel hums, and it's totally unscathed, undamaged. The guy says, wow, you have strong vessels. I didn't learn anything. I made them, thank you. My doing the test wasn't to reveal to me something that I didn't know. I did it to show him something he didn't know. So tests are designed to reveal things that are otherwise hidden. That's true, but hidden from whom? Not necessarily from the one who's conducting the test. And that is indeed the way even other commentators try to understand it. That when it says by Shabbos, I think I was going to bring it, Ladas, it means Lahodia, to make known to others that this is the case. Not to you and not to me, but to make known to others. So the word test doesn't have to mean that the tester acquires new knowledge that the tester didn't have before. Doesn't have to mean that. Yeah.
I guess, the Rambam wouldn't agree to this. We went over the issue with free will and foreknowledge, but really under the interpretations of which we describe God as almost like looking into the future and then getting his knowledge from that, couldn't we say that the tests give rise for God to be able to know how would they go about things?
That's a very interesting question. As you point out, it's not relevant to the Rambam because he rejects that idea. Maybe it could be right, but it might not matter because when we talk about God's, see, this is a nice question. There's a difference between asking, is God ignorant or is not God ignorant? Is God ever ignorant? Is there any point in time which you could say, at this point in time he didn't know Q? That's one question. A separate question is, okay, at all points in time he knows everything, but how did he get that knowledge? Where did he get it from? I think that's what the people you're referring to would say. Yes, he got his knowledge from the test, but it doesn't imply that he was ignorant beforehand. That's what the Rambam is against. It would imply that he was ignorant beforehand. Since you could project the knowledge from the test backwards in time, there's no time at which God is ignorant. There's no transition for him from ignorance to knowledge. That's one of the things that the Rambam is interested to protect against. And as you point out, he's not going to accept this idea that he gets his knowledge from our actions at all. So this wouldn't be relevant to him.
But obviously, under other views in which this wouldn't be an issue, considering the problem for free will and foreknowledge, then therefore you could see how tests would be able to bring about God's knowledge. I guess is reliant on these tests.
That's right. That's a good way to put it. Okay. It's reliant upon. Right. That's a good way to put it. Yes.
This still doesn't address the pain, though, right?
Oh no, I haven't gotten to there.
Okay.
No. We're just early days. Okay. Now the Rambam at the bottom of page 16 goes through all the verses in the Torah which describe trials and explains how they can be understood as serving either or both of these purposes, and that is their only function. Okay, that's the end of page 16. Now we have the new handout. Okay, here we go. Here's one. another one. Another one. There's another one. There's another one. I think I have one more to give out. Yeah. There's another one. Okay, if there aren't enough, then I'll have to share. Yeah.
So does this, first, do I go through similar tests in the sense that Hashem does things to me so it can be a demonstration to others of how they should behave as well within my small pocket of life? And in that case, does the publication or the teaching effect of my action count as my punishment or reward? So for instance, yeah, like the fact that I did a good thing and then other people saw that and then they derived better behavior from that, does that get factored into how much merit I get? And
Yeah, but you now asked two different questions. First, you asked about whether it's part of your reward, and now you asked whether it contributes to your merit. Those are two very different questions. It definitely factors into your merit. The reward is something you have to receive for yourself. You may not even know that it has the effect on the other people. That can't be part of your reward. Okay, so now on 17, I reiterate the problem. Our problem is to see how this explanation of trials solves the problem of injustice. At first glance, it is very hard to see the solution to the problem. It seems that if the question of justice is focused on the past, when you ask whether what happens is just or unjust, what you're doing is comparing what happens with the past. And you're trying to see whether in the past there's something which makes this event appropriate. Every pain is supposed to be because of some transgression in the past. Explaining how trials serve purposes in the future does not seem to remove this objection that past actions are not the source of the pain. It just changes the subject. It still seems that the suffering involved in facing the trial is not the result of any transgression in the past, and therefore it is a violation of justice. So, reading the chapter, reading these ideas in the chapter 323 don't obviously solve the problem. So I want to suggest a solution. Now this is a suggestion. Hypothesis on my part. I'm not fully satisfied the solution is correct, because I must add a condition to the Rambam's principle of divine justice, which is not explicitly in the text. Still, it is based on many things that he does say, so I think there's at least a relevant suggestion. Here he goes. The challenge is to explain why the suffering involved in a trial is not unjust, even though there's no prior transgression. I suggest that we need to look very carefully at the concept of justice. In particular, we need to ask when the concept of justice is required to explain and justify an action. When do we say, this happened, where's the justice? When do we say that? Do we always ask that? Under every possible condition? Or maybe there are times when you look at the action and you know the context of the action and you say, justice doesn't apply here. It's not relevant because the action has a different character, kind of character for which justice isn't a relevant consideration. For example, if one person gives a gift to another person out of love or kindness, we do not object that the recipient did nothing to earn the gift. Hey, what did he do to earn it? What did he pay for it? What merit does he have to receive it? The whole idea of a gift that's given out of love or kindness is that it's a gift which the other person doesn't deserve, hasn't earned, has no right to. Because as we have said before in different circumstances, if he has earned it, deserved it, has a right to it, I don't show any love by giving it to him. I have to give it to him. I'll be a criminal if I don't give it to him. That's not love. That's not kindness. Love and kindness apply when he has no claim on it. I give it to him anyway. So he says, yeah, but where's the justice? I'm sorry, this isn't the transaction of justice. It's the transaction of love and kindness. So no one is going to challenge this example with a question of where's the wait till you see how the implications go. Right? A gift is not rendered morally objectionable on the grounds that it was not earned. No one can say you did something wrong. You should be criticized and condemned for it when you give a free gift. See, sometimes when pleasure is received, the question of justice does not arise. Okay, that's probably an easy case. Now, the same thing can be said of pain. Here we come to our subject. If someone causes pain, but that pain benefits the person who's suffering, his life is better now. Things are going better for him now. The pain brought him to a better condition. We do not object on the grounds of injustice that the person suffering did nothing wrong. After all, inflicting pain on him benefited him. It's good for him. You could even imagine that if he realized that pain would be good for him, he'd do it for himself. Because he's in a better position now. He's in a better state now. The pain he's suffering is good for him. It too is a gift, even though the recipient is suffering pain. So you could have a pain which is right, okay, morally appropriate, unobjectionable, beyond criticism, not because it's a deserved punishment for a past action, but because it's an investment in a better future. So in other words, the concept of justice can be looked at in two ways. If the pain that the person is suffering improves his future, the question of justice doesn't arise because the reason for the pain and the justification of the pain is what it does for the future. Justice arises when you're going to ask, was it right, was it wrong, was it appropriate, was it good, was it bad, should I criticize, should I prevent? When the only answers to those questions are determined by what happened in the past and not in the future. Oh, if you're going to look to the past to judge whether what happened was appropriate or inappropriate, then he better have earned it. It better be just.
Can we look at one example, the paradigm with the brothers selling Joseph to slavery in the sense of it was a painful act, but from a larger perspective, it benefited him. It benefited him, and it kind of led to kind of salvation of his family.
Well, it did, but now I don't know what I'm going to do with that fact. Their intention was to kill him.
Right, and that intention at the time has caused pain, but in the long run, because it was beneficial to Joseph, Joseph, and to the family. Are you saying in that case, because the future, the results kind of justify the pain in some ways?
I don't see. You're asking an interesting question, but I don't see they're relevant to our consideration. I'm trying to explain when justice applies, when it doesn't. I'm pointing out that sometimes when pain is inflicted, the pain is not objectionable because it serves a good purpose, and the question of justice doesn't arise. But how is it going to affect the case of the brothers where they intended to do him harm? They didn't intend to do him good. As a matter of fact, what you're saying is explicit in the verses in Vayechi, which you probably know, right? Where when the brothers are afraid that Joseph's going to punish them, he says, "You did something to me. I only got good out of it." Atem chashavtem alai ra'ah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu halikim achashva l'tova. Right? So I'm not going to punish you or take revenge that you actually harmed me. You didn't actually harm me, but he does say, Atem chashavtem alai ra'ah. You thought to do me evil. Correct. And that means that Joseph has a double message to them. You are worried that I'll take revenge, that you actually harmed me? No, I won't do that because it's not true. You didn't harm me. But you're still guilty because you thought to do harm. And that's between you and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And I can't forgive you for that. That's your cheshbon, not my cheshbon. So it is an illustration of a case where the suffering itself actually was a benefit, and no one can claim that the suffering was something which, by the way, see, you're introducing a case that's complex. You say, well, where's the benefit? He ended up viceroy in Egypt, right?
Right.
Couldn't he have ended up viceroy in Egypt without being sold into slavery? God's behind everything, right?
Right.
So then you could say that the suffering that he had on the way was surplus. So then it isn't the suffering that brought him to that.
Right.
It was the circumstances that brought him to that. So that wouldn't justify the suffering. Okay, I'm talking now about where a person suffers I want to look at the suffering, and when the Rambam says that all suffering is no suffering is unjust, let's put it that way. No suffering is unjust, and all he has told us is it's not unjust because it was earned by failure. I want to say there's another way for it not to be unjust. And that is, it's the kind of suffering where justice and injustice don't arise. They don't come into the question. And why? Because this suffering is designed to produce a benefit in the future, and therefore the question of justice and unjustice doesn't arise. Just like giving a gift doesn't arise, and just like when you cause a person suffering in order to benefit him. Now, again, let me just stress what I said to this gentleman now. It's got to be the suffering that benefits him. It can't be, I do X to him, X makes him better. On the way, X causes him to suffer, and that's just too bad. Like my case of the person giving an injection to a child, where the needle hurts him and he becomes immunized against a disease, that the pain didn't help him there. The immunization helped him, and the pain was a byproduct, and the doctor couldn't do any better. No, we've got to talk about where the pain is. So this person, you got a 7-year-old, and he's very delicate. And he's stressed out when he's denied something that he's looking forward to, and he's weak and he's delicate and he's not going to make it in life because he doesn't know how to handle stress. So the solution can be cause him some stress and enable him to handle it. You hear this, for example, not everybody agrees on these things in psychology, but the parents who never fight in front of their children, never disagree, everything's harmonious. When you first get married, it often happens that not everything's harmonious. And then the child goes to pieces. He's 23, he's never seen conflict. He has no idea how to handle it, no idea how to resolve it. He has no example of seeing conflict and seeing resolution so that he knows that conflict doesn't have to be deadly. So then, sometimes I'll tell the parents, okay, express some of your differences in front of the children and act out, irritation, and then so the child has a picture of that, so he's prepared for it in life. Now, when the child sees the parents irritated with one another, he'll be in pain, but that pain is crucial for him to be able to lead a much happier life. So it's the pain that makes him better. And somebody says, but look, to the parents, you behave that way in front of me, you cause your child pain. That's child abuse. Not really, because this pain was an investment in his future, and it could only be done through pain. It couldn't be done any other way. So then the question of justice won't arise. Yes?
So I get the concept of, but it's still at some point it does seem, for an example, I know somebody who was kind of like not a very respectful person doing a lot of things, and something bad. He got into an accident, lost his legs, and his life kind of changed in a really good way. Now he's happily married, and it definitely didn't seem that way. But he never did anything bad in the past. It still just seems like, I know that justice doesn't come into fact, but it still just doesn't seem like fair in the well, it's not fair, but it still somehow doesn't seem just in the Maimonides way up until what we learned about, because he never did anything that bad, and he needed the pain, I guess, but... Okay, so
I don't know if you noticed, I changed my vocabulary. I stopped in the middle of the sentence, I changed my vocabulary, and I did it in order to avoid this objection, but I didn't stress it, I did it 3 minutes ago. I changed from saying just to saying not unjust.
Okay.
I think you'll agree in a case like that, it's not unjust. I want to say it's outside the category of justice. A pain that causes a future good, and the only way to get to the future good is through the pain, the question of justice doesn't arise for that. Justice is only when you're taking the event, let's say the pain, and you're forced, for some reason, to compare it with the past and see that this pain is appropriate given the past. That's when justice applies. And there the Rambam says it's always going to be right. It's never going to be wrong. I think that's the essence of my solution.
It's outside of what Rambam was saying completely.
Say again?
It's outside of what Rambam was saying completely because it's just not.
Yes, but now you see, he says both things over and over again, that God is just and he's not unjust. He quotes verses that say both. So I'm taking out the category of not unjust to protect against these kinds of pains which serve a future purpose. I mean, when the Rambam tells us that trials serve the purpose of creating a better circumstance in the future, when he tells us that's what the trials are for, I'm putting two and two together and saying, that's why the Rambam isn't worried about those pains, because their appropriateness is in terms of their future consequences, and the question of justice doesn't apply. That last step is what I'm putting in to link it with the previous. Yeah.
Two quick questions. When Rambam said that every pain is a punishment for a transgression, did he specify a past transgression?
No, he did. Oh, yeah. Well, yes, right. No, it would never be for a transgression in the future. No.
Okay. And then my second question is, it seems that this solution only applies if someone actually passes the test and becomes better. What happens if a person fails their test and the pain doesn't benefit them?
So there are two things to say. First of all, there is a verse. It's a good question. There's a verse, Hashem Tzadik Yivchan, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tests the righteous, meaning he chooses the people who are fit to pass the test.
Not everyone is.
Listen. That's one thing. There's a verse that says that. Now, number two, and this is independently a very important point, which I don't have here in the manuscript, not every obstacle that stands in your way is a test. We have a principle. Any test that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings to a person, he can pass. That principle can be read two ways. You're navigating your way through life, and there are things standing in your way, and there are things that are causing difficulties, and there are things that are attacking you. You can pass all of them because God says you can pass every test. That's one way to read it. I think that's the wrong way to read it. No, the right way to read it is like this. I have all sorts of obstacles in my path. I'm challenged by them. Which ones are tests and which ones aren't tests? Answer, well, we have a principle. The ones you can overcome are tests because you can pass every test. So if there's an obstacle in your way which you can't overcome, that one's not a test. It's an obstacle, but it's not a test. And therefore, if you do not overcome that obstacle, you haven't failed the test. So then you ask, well, so then what's the point of the obstacle? The point of the obstacle can be to deal with your inability to overcome it. You will experience this, every one of you, with your children. Because sometimes children do things or they have difficulties and you can't solve them because they can't take the solution from you. You know the solution, but they can't take it from you. Do you remember when you were 17? How exactly did you feel about your father's advice and your father's rules and so on and so on? Okay, for somebody was 14, somebody was 19, right? So then, well, how does the father feel? My child is suffering. I know what needs to be done, and I can't do it because he can't take it from me. And you have to deal with your inability to conquer it. So that's not a test. The test there is not to overcome this obstacle because it's not possible for you. So that way it comes out that from God's point of view, every test could be passed. God doesn't put a person in a position where he puts him in an obstacle which is impossible to overcome and then says you failed the test and then punishes him. That doesn't happen. So every pain that's ordained by the test is a pain which is designed to create a positive benefit in the future. If a person fails the test through his own free will, that he can't blame on God. That he can't blame on God.
You'd still say in that case, the pain was to benefit them, but their own free will got in the way of them.
That's right. People injure themselves all the time.
So has every obstacle been used for a test? So the obstacle itself is not a test, but you're just making it seem like maybe I'm misunderstanding it. The obstacle itself is used for a separate test, or no?
Again, take the case of the parent with the child, right? He cannot solve the child's problem for him. He can't because the child won't accept it. Whatever he does, they will not solve it. That's an obstacle. He feels deprived by it. He feels helpless. He feels his life is compromised by the fact that his child is suffering this problem, right? The obstacle of solving the problem for the child isn't a test because he can't solve the problem for the child. That's not a test. So the fact that he doesn't solve the problem doesn't mean he failed the test. It's not a test. Some obstacles are tests, some obstacles are not tests.
Does he have any test in that situation?
Sorry?
In a situation where there's the obstacle present, does he have any tests to do in that situation?
Well, there may be something else that needs to be done, but I'm talking about the obstacle of solving the problem for the child. Life has lots of dimensions, lots of characteristics. Yeah.
So to understand what he's saying, like I might offer you your dream job, and it's a huge opportunity, but you can still blow it. It's still not coming from strict justice. It's still, chesed or not unjust, whatever we call that category.
That's right.
But yeah, you can mess up, but it's coming from a place of generosity.
That's right, and therefore the pain involved, since the pain is part of the generosity,
Okay.
it doesn't risk being unjust.
Unfortunately, it's all for naught, because the person failed the free will test.
Say it again. I get it.
Unfortunately, the pain in that case is all for naught, because the person failed to pass the test due to their own choices.
Yes, but it wasn't imposed unjustly. It was imposed generously. You know what it's like? It's like you give somebody a present and he misuses it and injures himself with it. Does that threaten the morality of you giving him the gift?
No, not at all.
Okay, well that's all we're worried about
Just
here.
thinks for that person.
All we're worried about here is whether the way God runs the world is just or isn't just. And you present someone with a gift, the person misuses it. That's not God's fault. Yes.
My question is about miracles and merits. How is it that Rav Hanina Mendoza was able to put his foot into the hole of snakes and know that he was not going to get his merits deducted for it? Because that's like a nest. That's like a miracle.
Well, it is, but I'm sort of missing the connection with what we're talking about. We're talking now about Maimonides' principle that everything that God does is just. And in particular, he said, if you suffer a pain, it's because of some past failure. And we are now considering whether imposing tests on people, which cause them pain, isn't a contradiction to Maimonides' principle. That's the subject that we're working on right now. I do have every Monday night at 8:30 an open Q&A, and you can ask any question that's on your mind. But here we're working on a particular subject, so I'll see what the connection would be. Yeah.
So we just said that God's purpose can be, is it usually or always good for a person?
Okay, we're talking now about justice.
Yeah.
We haven't introduced the idea of good at all. We haven't introduced the idea of good at all. I mean, I don't know why I should. I don't. Let me finish the exposition of tests, okay? Before we go into that. Of course, tests are coming from someplace else. Tests don't come under justice at all. Justice is responding to past actions in a certain way. That's what justice is. Investment in the future doesn't come under justice at all. That's my point. My point is outside the attribute of justice. I'm just doing that to solve a problem about how he describes pain. That's all I'm doing at the present time. The idea of good is a separate idea. Yeah.
If you just clarify again the purpose of obstacles then? I'm still kind of confused on that. The purpose themselves and the obstacles.
I mean, this isn't really, a deep, subtle, secret thing. You can't jump 10 feet into the air. Mm-hmm. That's too bad. That's an obstacle and you can't overcome it. You'll never overcome it. Jumping freely into the 10 feet requires superb acrobatic training that you will never have. That's an obstacle. What purpose does it serve? To set the boundaries of the choices that are available to you when you make your free decisions.
Why? Why is it? Why? I
Yeah, the alternative is to be all powerful like God.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's not the way He wants us to make our decisions.
But again, is there a reason as to why we limited the decision? Is it achieve a greater purpose in trying to do something, or?
I'm saying, you have a certain ability to weigh alternatives. Mm-hmm. If I give you a book with 476 alternatives, you'll never make that decision because you'll never. You know what they find that when you have too many different brands in a supermarket, people become anxious. They become anxious and irritable and which soap? Well, there's 32 different soaps. How am I going to decide which one of the 32 soaps? And that hurts people, right? So, it's just not realistic. You have to have a limited number because your mind is limited, right? I don't know what.
It's to make accurate decisions or better decisions, to narrow in our decisions, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So let's yeah.
How would the father know whether it's an obstacle or whether it just didn't try it enough and was enough
Okay.
effort?
So this is a very important question, and this is a general question, a question of self-knowledge. We have to use self-knowledge very often in making our decisions, and this is one of them. How do I know what my abilities are? The first thing to say is, you don't have perfect self-knowledge. You don't. And you're not expected to. Second thing to say is, once upon a time, God set it up where you could get answers to these questions, because from the time of the exodus from Egypt for 1,000 years, there were prophets. A lot of prophets. Excluding the population left Egypt, over the 1,000 years, there were 1,200,000 prophets, 600,000 men and 600,000 women. Everyone lived with prophets in their local environment. The Ramban says during that period of time, no one went to a doctor. You have a physical condition, that's a symptom. It's not a disease, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of a spiritual problem. Go to the prophet and ask him, what's the spiritual problem? Correct that problem, and the physical symptoms will go away. In medicine, they tell you, don't treat the symptoms, treat the disease. The disease is really spiritual. So for 1,000 years, no one went to a doctor. That would be treating only the symptoms, not treating the disease. Okay, so in those times, you could get this information. Since then, when we don't have prophets, we don't have this information, not that kind of source. So, number one, there are people who are older, more experienced, and wiser than we are, and it makes sense to go to them. If you're going to ask them for help with your monitoring your health, or monitoring your monetary resources, or monitoring your garden or your car, it would make sense to go to people who have had more wisdom, more experience in monitoring your spiritual development and your decisions and your projects. You have it in sports. You have trainers in sports who will tell you, do this, don't do that. I have done that for many years. And often what they tell you is totally unintuitive. But they know better. That's their job. That's their profession. So number one, one thing you can do is consult with people who are reasonable to consult with. Number two, you can experiment. You can instead of saying, I'm ready for this new step in Jewish practice, from now on I'm going to X, you say, I think I am. I'm not sure. I'll try it as an experiment. I'll try it for a month and see how it goes. And after a month, I'll reevaluate. And sometimes you find that after a month, you just didn't succeed in keeping it up, and you feel you've made the best effort, or you kept it up, but it cost you elsewhere. Because you did this, other things in your performance go down, and it's just not worth it. Now, it is not infallible, but it's a way you gather information and you can make reasonable decisions. And that's the way you have to do it. There's no other way to do it. God wants us to live with the uncertainty of not having prophecy. And that means we have to make decisions about which we're not positive that they're correct. But you don't make them blindly. You gather the best information that you can. This is true in general for self-knowledge. Yeah.
So reading this approach to pain in its future benefit, the question is, why is it a condition required to reach a greater future pain? Like, why is pain an ingredient that has to be part of achieving a superior...
So the Rambam raises this question a little bit further on. Well, since you asked, I'll tell you the answer. But he says, God has a principle in running the world of not changing human character, human psychology. And it's explicit in the Torah. One thing about the Rambam is he says philosophical things, and he brings an explicit verse from the Torah, and you think, boy, I didn't see that in the verse. But when you think about it, it's there. You just have to look at it the right way. It says they left Egypt, and it says God didn't take them the short 11-day distance to enter the land immediately, because maybe they'll see war and turn around and run back to Egypt. So the Rambam imagines a critic who says, just make them more courageous. Then they can go in the short way. So the Rambam says, you see, God doesn't change human nature, human character. That's a rule that he has for running the world. So that's going to be across the board now. He's working within the limitations of human character. I mean, we would have a whole explanation of that on Kabbalistic grounds, and Rambam doesn't have those Kabbalistic grounds, at least not explicitly. But he raises the question, he says, look, you see from this example in the Torah that God doesn't change human nature. That's what he's got to work with them. Yeah,
surely there's like some other way. I mean, I haven't been able to think about it so long, but surely there's some other way to cope and still maintain free will other than pain. You know, like some people like find certain things more beautiful than others or something like this. I mean, there's got to be another way to test a human rather than pain.
Has to test the human.
Well,
Well, hold on one second. Well, one second. We're justifying pain across the board. We're justifying pain across the board. Right? All types of pain if they're an investment in the future. But now let's take the Rambam's purposes, right? One purpose is to teach what you are to do. Well, one of the things that you have to be taught to do is work hard to do what God wants you to do. Don't quit when it gets tough, but tough it out and overcome the obstacles. How are you going to be taught that? You're going to be taught that by seeing people who do it and saying, okay, if he did it, so I understand it's humanly possible. I can't excuse myself on the grounds that it's beyond the ability of people to do it. And if that's the case, then I have to set myself to do it as well. But in order for that lesson to be communicated, it's got to be hard for him. And if it's hard for him, there's going to be pain involved. That's one of the things he says, actually. One of the examples that he gives in that chapter. Okay, so let's see if we can cover a little bit more ground, and we'll come back to this on Sunday, Mr. Hashem. Okay, so now we're where the underlining is on page 17. So we're now understanding the Rambam is saying that all pain that does not benefit the person who is suffering must be due to past transgression. We're putting in that qualification. I said at the beginning of the discussion, it's not explicitly in the Rambam, and that's why I'm diffident about it. I'm not passionately committed to my answer. I think that it's a relevant answer because it's based on other things he says elsewhere. But I have to put in that condition, which he didn't explicitly put in. And now the explanation of trials is clear. The Rambam shows that the purposes of all trials are to teach what should be done and or what should be thought. Both lessons benefit those who follow them. Since they produce benefit, the suffering involved in passing the tests does not violate justice. Now, as I noted above, this extra condition, namely that transgression is necessary to justify suffering only when the suffering is not a benefit, is not explicitly stated by the Rabbi. His insistence on absolute justice is very often expressed unconditionally in the Sefer. But since he himself does raise the problem of trials and promises an explanation, and all he says about trials is what I've reported, I think that my explanation fills the gap. And then I want to finish with the top of 18. Finally, note well, the problem of trials does not undermine the commitment to individual providence implied by the principle of justice. What is the purpose of the whole discussion? The purpose of the discussion is to illustrate individual providence. The idea of justice was, if you get a pain, it's because of something you did. If you get a pleasure, it's because of something you did. Well, that's individual providence. That's something where Kadosh Baruch Hu takes my life and my actions into account individually and responds to them. So I feel I'm connected, I'm being led, I'm being managed in terms of all my individuality and uniqueness. That's true. Trials doesn't call that into question because the trials too are chosen for the person for whom it's appropriate for him to communicate these goals. Abraham was chosen. Moses was chosen. Right? Jacob was chosen. These are very great people. They were chosen to undergo the trials to teach us how to live our lives because they were the ones who could teach us this by virtue of their great character, their great courage. So this I think is a way to handle the problem. Now you're talking about you can see. I asked this to somebody yesterday after the shir. Not all trials require suffering, but there are some trials which are designed to teach some sorts of things which will involve suffering. And all I'm interested in is the trials that have pain in them. Those are the only ones that raise a problem, right? And then when the trials are coming from God, which is what we're talking about, where the Torah itself says that God tried someone, so then it was chosen for that purpose. Now, the great example of this is the Akedah, when God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And he called it off at the last minute when Abraham already was ready to go through with it. So there's no question that Abraham was prepared to do it. If you have the illusion, I've had people tell me this, well, but that was Abraham, you know. If you were as great as Abraham, if you had heard God speak as many times and seen as many miracles that he did, Abraham must have sailed through it, you know, no problem. The verses don't indicate that there was any suffering on Abraham's part, there was any doubt or any struggle on Abraham's part. Maybe he just sailed through it. Well, that's wrong. Because Rabbi Meiselman showed me a midrash which says the following. At the end, God, through the malach, through the angel, says to Abraham, by my word, by my name, I've sworn to you that you will get this and this benefit. So the midrash asks, God swore to Abraham? Really? Why did he do that? Why did God have to swear to Abraham? And the answer is given that Abraham said to God, you're offering me a great future, you're offering me a great benefit, promise me you'll never test me again. And not Isaac either. Never again. Why did he do that? Because it was tough. It was really, really hard. Kovash Rachamav. He had to conquer his mercies and his love for his son in order to be able to prepare to give him up. Don't test me ever again. So it was excruciatingly difficult. And now, if a person says, well, Abraham sailed through it, but if he would ask me to do it, it would kill me because I wouldn't be able to do it. No, he didn't sail through it. It was excruciatingly difficult for him also. And what he showed you is he could do something that's excruciatingly difficult. And you too might be asked to do something that's excruciatingly difficult. And Abraham's example shows you that human beings can do excruciatingly difficult things. That's an important lesson, yeah.
I'm sure you said this earlier now, but if there's no one else to learn something for the test that we go through, can we learn something from learn something about ourselves from these tests?
What was the
hypothesis?
if there's no one, what?
Let's. I don't. And this is not actually necessarily conditional. Just say, can we learn something about ourselves from these tests? Because you can imagine the times when you tested and no one else observed
I don't
the
know.
test.
Of course you can. You know, the Gemara says that Hillel was poor in order to cause other poor people to be responsible. Hillel was so poor he couldn't pay the trivial coin to into the house of study. So he climbed up on the roof and he listened from the skylight, and it was winter and he got snowed on. They found him in the morning where he was frozen stiff, right? And Hillel didn't steal. So the Gemara says, you know, there are people who say, cheat on my taxes? Listen, I understand that Bill Gates doesn't cheat on his taxes. I understand that. Because he's doing okay. But, you know, me? I'm driving a 3-year-old Porsche, you know. I just can't make it. Somebody like me has to do it. He said, well, listen, you're not poorer than Hillel. He was much poorer than you, and he didn't steal. Aha. Well, and by the way, people judge themselves comparatively. When we shouldn't, but we do. Imagine you're tempted to do a transgression, and you think no one else does it. I think that would be a very strong disincentive. I'll be the only one who'll fail at this? I can't do that. Somebody tells you, oh, you're missing it. 40% people make this mistake. Okay, so 40% make it, it's a good failure. That's totally false reasoning. The question is whether I can conquer it or not. What's it got to do with whether other people do it or not? Imagine a Nazi saying, it wasn't so bad to kill Jews because lots of people are killing Jews. You know? I just did what everybody else was doing. That doesn't excuse killing Jews. But we do judge ourselves comparatively. So, here, just one second, I lost the thread. Where are we going?
Who taught Hillel?
Yeah, right. So he looks at Hillel and he says, he's desperately poor. He's definitely not stealing. So, by comparison, I say, I can't excuse myself to steal. That's how the lesson is taught. Now, it's not easy to be poor. Indeed, Hillel had to spend some time as a wood chopper outside the Beis Medrash to earn his living. He may have done that for his mitos, like Rav Dessa says, okay. But he had to do that. That was a loss. It was necessary. So I think that, of course, you can learn from your own trials. By the way, you can learn from your own trials because sometimes when things happen, you respond in a way that you didn't anticipate. Wow. Suddenly, there was a fire, and I didn't go to pieces. I didn't. I was cool. I was focused. I was able to put it out. I thought I would run in fright. Oh. I guess I have abilities bigger, so then I have more responsibilities now because I know that I can handle it. So all these things have a beneficial effect.